So, Jeff, your website, like Beast, your website have like that website is first at first impression that is so confusing. Like, what is it about? I don't even get an idea when you first when I first went through when I was trying to send you the mail before that. So I just opened and I just went through this. Is it the same guy was Time Warp who hosted the Time Warp? And then I just done my research about that. Yes, the name is same and the person is looking the same, but I'm not getting anything about the Time Warp. So your website is all about the patterns and understanding the nature and the patterns of the nature and uh, other things you have on website that we will be talking about in a while. So please tell us about your website and what was the idea behind making a website like that, because you have great observations and great photographer like photographs. I still remember like I was watching a photograph of yours, your own photographs of like that was in a ribbon kind of texture, like you made yourself in a ribbon, which is giving it a 3D effect. The 2D picture was looking like a 3D. So how that idea of making this kind of website came?
Mm. Yeah, well, I've been putting up websites since like 2000, so it's been in a lot of generations. And I feel like the most obvious thing in early websites was to share your photography. It's just a way, exactly what you're saying. It was just an easy way to have a portfolio. And instead of you having to come to my house to see all my photos, now the world can see my photos. Pretty amazing thing. I mean, photography changed so dramatically since the internet came around because everyone can see everyone's work.
And I guess that those two are your clicks, so not anything else behind you.
So yeah, let me explain these. This is actually from the pilot from Time Warp, and if I move, you can see that it's like an anime, one of those animated lenticular displays.
Oh my God! Yes, yes, yes. Now I can see that.
Yeah. And then this is a photo my brother took of me while I was in Bali, and we were in the monkey forest. And this is a pretty special one because I love this kind of photo because the monkeys are looking at a really large lens, right? And they see their reflection in the lens. And because the lens is big enough for them to see their whole face, they think that there are other monkeys inside the camera, right? And so it's like a very early version of self-consciousness, self-awareness, that we all take for granted. We just, oh yeah, of course I'm Shiva, of course I exist and I know I exist, but that's a very unique thing on the planet. And that kind of ties in with where my website work has gone. Actually, it's a kind of interesting segue because I've been interested in science, but I'm most interested in science in the sense of how can we understand how we're having a human experience. And one of the things that really mystified me for a long time, still mystifies me actually, is if you look at all of science and you look at quantum mechanics and particle physics and cosmology and all the things, then all of a sudden you can see all the atoms in your cells and how your cells form. There's no understanding of why you're having an experience.
Yes.
There's just the things, right? The way I describe it is there's all the nouns, but there's none of the verb. Right now, I'm not having the experience of molecules. I'm having the experience of seeing. And so we have all these descriptions, objective, materialistic descriptions of what that process looks like. But there's no way right now to use that science to understand why we're having it as an experience, right? Like that could all just run as computer code, not consciously. But for some reason, this is actually happening. And not even for some reason. The thing we know the most is that this is happening. In some very weird way, if you're honest with yourself, this is actually something more real to my experience than something called a molecule. that's something I learned when I was at class, but I learned it from listening to the teacher and watching the teacher and having discussions, right? It always comes back down to my sensory experience. And the more I did science looking at the objective world, it didn't penetrate into my personal experience. It became more and more of a glaring, weird oddity that, like, how come none of this is talking about what's happening? Right? It's talking about what's happening out here, but it's not talking about what's happening in here. My whole life happens right here with what's happening. So that just became like a huge question mark for me. And when I finished with Time Warp, I just took a couple of years off. I was pretty burnt out from working so much. And I just took a step back, and I started getting in more into our work, which is also on the website now. But these questions about the nature of existence started to be much more in the foreground. And so that just kind of took over from there. And more I got into studying perception, like animal perception, and how different animals have a different experience of the world, and what must that feel like. And then everything from that into consciousness, meditation, enlightenment, and then looking at the scientific lenses that are trying to actually have a conversation around those topics, which is still pretty rare, but it's an explosion that's happening right now. I think we're in the midst of a scientific revolution where over the next 20 years, we're just going to see a total explosion of science trying to understand not only the nature of experience, but how that connects to spirituality. And if those two things can link together, those are two of the most powerful forces on the planet, spirituality and science. But right now they've been kind of like separate over here. So if there's actually ways for them to communicate, that's a huge potential shift for humankind.
One thing I would like to ask you here, that you're a science guy and you have been studying science from a very long time, and spirituality is something that commonly we don't connect it with science. So how you came to this path of spirituality, and uh, how you, what made you to come to the path of spirituality? And you were talking about in a podcast you were talking about, like, you have learned spirituality from a guy who was questioning something, who was questioning the existence, and was trying to explain all the people about the existence through science experiments. So how you, like, कैसे समझाऊं? Uh, so what to tell?
I understand what you mean.
Okay, so like, how you came to spirituality and how you made yourself to made your brain to understand that yes, I want to go to the spiritual path, because a science guy and a spiritual guy, in common world there are two parallel lines that doesn't intersect. So how this intersection happened?
Yeah. I think there's two main ways people come to spirituality. And one of them is they're born into it. It's just the tradition that they're part of. And so it's the way that they, and I was born Jewish. And so for a while I went to Jewish school and learned all their traditions and stuff, but it just it didn't align with my scientific mind at the time. This is like as a 9-year-old. So this is really early. But for me, when I was in my early 30s, I had gone through all these experiences that kept making me think, oh, this is going to make me feel like totally happy. I'm going to get in a relationship, or I'm going to get a certain job and get certain money, and all the kind of classic things people attribute to happiness. And as far as I can tell, that's not how happiness actually works. It's the promise of those things, but then when you get those things, you're happy for like 2 weeks. And then your mind creates the next thing that you feel like you need to get. And so I feel like I had a really, ironically, I would call it lucky moment when I was in my early 30s, because I felt like I had gotten all those things. And so all of a sudden it got really clear to me that none of those things are going to make me feel like totally happy and in myself. And when I was in high school, I had depression, and there was always this tendency to have my mind rolling and like analyzing everything. And I think that comes with being a really scientific person, but also just in our world, our minds are running all the time, and so I was noticing all the ways that my mind was making me suffer. I'd analyze things that weren't happening in my life or things that could have happened differently. It's the classic thing, right? Most people might not take a look at it, but when you just sit still, this thing just doesn't want to stop. It wants to keep going, and I've given some talks where I've just asked people in the audience to just take 10 seconds and stop thinking, and actually for the people that are watching, let's just do it. Cause then I'll talk about it. Like for the next 10 seconds, just don't think about anything.
Let me just put a timer for everyone. Just for 10 seconds. Okay, start. Now.
So how was that for you?
It's tough, man. Like taking 10 seconds from your brain, not to think about the thing. And you are thinking that you are not thinking, but you are thinking that you are not thinking. that is messing up.
Yeah. Like, hey, I'm doing pretty good in here, and then you like catch it and you see that there's always these mirrors going on. Yeah. So it's a good catch. So, and none of this is to say like, this means there's something wrong with you, but what I would say I started to notice is that this is happening to all of humanity, addicted to thinking. And we used to be animals that didn't know how to do that. Right. And so this is where it gets really interesting to me. If you look at a dog, and we know dogs, they have emotions, they have basic understandings, but they don't sit around thinking about stuff. Right. When they're fed, it's not like, I wish that I was over in this vacation or anything. It's life. And so some part of that experience must be happening right here too, right? Some basic, totally present, animalistic kind of experience must be happening here. But also in a human being, we have thinking happening, conceptual thinking. And for me, the rude awakening was realizing that I don't even remember what it felt like to not be thinking all the time. The last time most of us were in that state, we were toddlers. We were, 3 years old or something. And that's right when we started learning language, and language started to get like this, just like laminated our entire existence. And now you can't even imagine what it's like to not have language and conceptual thinking. And thinking is such a trickster, right? It's like when you do that 10-second experiment, at first it might actually feel like I'm not even thinking. And then you notice, oh, that was a thought, And I tell people sometimes, think this thought in your head. I hear this, I hear this voice. When you let yourself think that thought in your head, that is very, very weird, right? Because you start to realize that all of your thinking is a form of auditory hallucination. So this is the kind of stuff, and as you said, like coming from a scientific background, it took me a long time to be open to spirituality, meditation, all that sort of thing. I remember actually I needed to read a book where neuroscientists were talking about, if you do this kind of meditation, it makes you feel more joy, more gratitude, and that sort of thing. And so that was actually the opening for me, where I was like, okay, I don't have to believe any cosmological thing. These people say it's going to make me feel good, feel better. So that was already like, okay, I'll try that, but it's not woo-woo kind of stuff, It was just for the purely practical benefit. But then, as you alluded to, I found this teacher named Nisargadatta, who was from Bombay. And he was very much like, he wasn't an educated man, but he was very scientific in the way that he was describing reality. And he was saying, do these experiments on yourself. It's like the ultimate science, right? It's like, you are the experiment. Your existence and your experience is the experiment. So do these experiments on yourself, on the nature of like, who are you? how do you feel like this? What does it mean to feel like I'm in here looking out of this body? Like those are things that now that I spent the last 10 years really exploring those questions, I'm mystified that that's not part of our education. That the deepest thing about what it means to exist and be is just like, oh, you'll figure that out, but let's talk about atoms and molecules. That's really weird to me, because so much of our happiness or suffering is dependent on understanding how our internal lives work.
You just like in your TED talk, you just mentioned one thing like which I've also experienced. Like there is a fundamental question, like do we are what we are like if we think this question like so one thing comes in our mind like what actually consciousness is like because there is a dead body in front of us. It is doesn't have any consciousness and it is lying there, but we are conscious and we are thinking. So is it our brain which is thinking or is it something else which is thinking? So you just raised a beautiful question like is it the consciousness stuck in our body, or we our body have a consciousness or our consciousness have a body? So that thought just striked in my mind because when like when we sat down and just when there was no this I'm talking about the pre-smartphone era because the time that smartphones have came, so like thinking all that stuff has become just like we are just scrolling down our Instagram and Facebook, so we don't have time for just that deep thoughts. But when we used to have that much of time, so I used to think like how is that happening? What is actually life, or are we alive? Or like from there then you get a concept of atma and like souls, that concept of souls, but there is no scientific background in that. So you are just kind of denying the fact because you are not that it's not that scientific and all, but you are somewhat you are believing in that because it is connecting to your thoughts, but you are trying to figuring out. So I just want to ask you, have you got the question answer of this question, that is consciousness stuck in the body or the body has the consciousness? Like all these years, like it's been 8 years from your TED talk, so have you got answer or have you went through close enough to get the answer? So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is that all these things are hard to talk about, right? Because we have to use thought and words to talk about things that are prior to thought and words. So it's just like it's a minefield of potential problems because we're trying to put words on things like, what is the taste of an apple? Whatever number of words you use to describe that, you're not actually getting at the thing. So it's really tricky. And this is why I like trying to figure out scientific approaches to these questions. The way, to try to put a label on with a question you're asking right now, what it feels like is happening is that there is awareness that exists. And I'd use different words, awareness and consciousness. And awareness is aware, but not conscious. Like if you're asleep and I tap you on the toe, you will wake up. But you weren't conscious of that, but there was an awareness, there was a response. So something must have felt that thing, but it wasn't this person that wakes up feeling it. It was just the system itself feels it. I now see consciousness as the feedback of that awareness. So it's like, there's now a thing feeling that awareness, but that thing itself is just more awareness, but it's awareness of a certain type. And as that type can look at my toe get, tapped by you, then all of a sudden that has a different sense of identity and that has a different kind of awareness. But this feeling, it's really important to remember that this feeling of being a separate entity wakes up when you wake up in the morning. You don't have that in the middle of deep sleep. You don't have a feeling of being a separate body, for example. And so from that perspective, it seems really clear that if you talk about body, you have to be really careful about what that means, because there's clearly something that's happening before I wake up that is functioning, that's metabolizing, that's digesting, breathing, all that stuff. And that doesn't require consciousness. That's an awareness on its own, if I'm differentiating those terms. But the thing that wakes up, that sees all that, that's consciousness, or that's how I'd use the word consciousness. And from that perspective, the body arises inside. Once that idea of me being here exists, then only then can there be the idea of having a body. And so it's really subtle, because it's like, I'm not talking about the existence of the awareness. I'm talking about the idea of having a body, which is very different than the intelligence that the body just has on its own before someone feels like they own the body, which is kind of like what the person inside here feels, right? They're like somewhere behind their eyes looking out, and they have a body, right? Like people say, my foot, well, what does that mean? Like, who are you if you own that foot? And there's a lot of weird, like, kind of mental brain teasers you can give yourself. Like if you think that you were your foot, like I am my foot. And then you think about, like, if I gave you anesthesia, I could cut your foot off and you wouldn't feel any different. You wouldn't even know I had done it. So somehow your sense of identity has nothing to do with any part of your body, at least your lower body. We have to do a different experiment to talk about taking your head off or something. But yeah, just to point out the fact that these are really subtle brain teasers, and we're trying to use this mind to understand itself, which is potentially impossible. Like, how would we possible? It'd be very lucky if it was possible. So I always tread really lightly in terms of like exploring these questions and knowing that, at least at this phase, I don't have certainty about any of the answers, but I'm really certain that the previous model of physics doesn't incorporate all this huge understanding of experience. And spirituality, I think there's plenty of spirituality that also doesn't ask critical questions enough and gets too stuck in its own belief systems. But I think there's a marriage between the two that's possible, where both sides are really trying to get to the deepest understanding of the nature of ourselves.
So there is a thing that is on your website, that is slow dance. So what actually that is, and that sculptures, that's the embodiment of that thing, what actually does that resemble, and how the idea of making that thing came, and how it was, like, how you proceeded with your idea.
I will grab one and show you.
Yes.
This is what it is. This is slow dance. So the story of this is really, it's one of my most fun stories, I would say, in terms of making art pieces. I've been making artwork for the last 20 years. And as you mentioned on my website, there's a bunch of larger art pieces. And this is one of the small.
I would like to ask about like breaking wave, fish out of water. What are these things? And like, when the music that you have used, like on the video, like shooting part, like the video has been shot and all this thing in slow motion, all the patterns have been made, that I don't know what was happening to me, but that was something that were giving me pleasure of something, like there was worth looking at it. So I just felt like that, and I was being so calm after looking those I was breaking waves. So what was the idea behind it, and how you made all these stuff, and what actually was your purpose? I would like to know.
So you want to go into breaking wave as the purpose?
And the thing that you have in your hand.
And slow dance. Yeah, so I'll go for, the larger work that we do is usually commissions for some museum or for some company for their buildings, for their lobbies. So Breaking Wave was a piece where we were asked by Biogen, which is a pharmaceutical company that makes multiple sclerosis drugs and things like that, to make a piece that really highlights some of the way that they work and some of the science for how they're making drug discovery is pretty incredible. They're using X-ray crystallography. They're bouncing X-rays off of molecules to back out like what is the shape of the molecule and all this sort of thing. And so we came up with this idea that really highlighted like how incredible is it that we can understand what shape a molecule is. That's like very sci-fi future technology, because we can't see the thing. We have to actually indirectly do that by bouncing stuff off of it and backing out the shape. So the Breaking Wave piece is all about almost like that needle in a haystack idea, where you're looking for something that's like a 1 in a billion chance of finding it. And so we made this cloud of 804 hanging spheres that looks like noise, but if you look at it from exactly the right place, you see hidden patterns that are inside it. And that's exactly what they're doing in a metaphorical way to find out how to create new pharmaceuticals. So a lot of the time, the kind of work we do is always like talking with the company, understanding what it is that they do, and then making a metaphor of that. And just on a side note, for that and for a lot of the videos, I and some friends make the music for them. So if you enjoyed the music, that was me playing guitar. It's easiest in some sense to like.
I've seen you playing the piano on the Instagram.
Cool. Yeah. I started posting a couple months ago, just playing around. So yeah, music's been a big part of my life, my whole life, and making these videos. A project like Breaking Wave, we work on it for 2 years. It's a big amount of time and investment and energy and love. And then afterwards, the way that most people are going to see it, the way that you're going to see it is through a video, probably not through seeing it in real life. And so making the documentation has always been really important to me because it reaches most of the people. And so you get to really think about the way you'd want to cast it and make it beautiful. And then the music is always a huge part of that. I cut the whole video but it's still silent. Like, okay, this looks good, but now we actually have to make the emotionality for it. And if you ever try to watch a movie with the sound off, it's very hard. It's very hard to feel the movie. It's much easier to listen to a movie with the video off and feel, sound is the thing that tends to create most of that emotional connection.
Let me just break it down to the stand-up comedy part. What if a stand-up comedian posting a video and you just like volume, you are lowering down the volume of audience laughing, then does it feel like the same as the original video or original show that you were in? So that's the part music plays in those videos.
Yeah, totally. Much less if you turn all the volume down and you can't even hear the comic. You're never going to have any laughter. You're not going to understand anything. But listening to it on an audio, just as much. So anyway, that's all pretty fascinating in terms of how those things work together to create a dramatic effect. And just to bring it to this one, I make most of my artwork for commissions, but I also, when I have close friends that are getting married, usually it's like my one chance to like focus on this person and like really make something special for them. And so I had 2 friends, Eric and Emily, that were getting married. This was like 7 years ago now. And they're both dancers. And so I wanted something that involved 2 things that were dancing with one another. And so I eventually landed on this. This is a much longer story of how this got made. We'd have to talk about it for a while. This is a machine that I don't want to give away the trick and the illusion. I would say people can watch it and try to figure it out, but it makes both of these objects look like they're moving in slow motion with an optical illusion. So it's breaking some of the rules of physics. Not really, obviously, because I don't know how to break the rules of physics really, but it's appearing to break the rules of physics using an electromagnet and some other technological feats. So yeah, if you look up or if you cut in a video of it, they can see what it actually looks like in real time. I originally just made it for my friends, but as soon as it was done, it felt like a lot of people would want one. And so I asked them permission to be able to manufacture it, and they were cool with that. And now we've sold about 6,000 of them, and a lot of people have them in their house, and it's spreading the word.
Still trying to figure it out, like how this thing is happening. Many people.
Yeah, what I love is when someone looks at it and they just kind of fall into the wonder of it. And this relates to what we were talking about the mind, One of the only times the mind goes quiet without a lot of training is wonder. You see something that you've never seen before that doesn't make sense. And there's usually wonder. And then if you're a scientifically minded person, at some point that wonder turns into very specific questions. Like, how is that working? Or did you do this? Did you do this? What's interesting to me there is that usually the wonder shifts into like I need to figure this out. But once in a while you have someone, I had one person at an art show one time look at this piece and they stood in front of it for like 40 minutes. And they never asked me any question about how it worked. And almost always, especially in Boston area, it's a lot of scientific minds. So people want to know how it works. So this person stood there for 40 minutes and I walked up to them and I said, hey, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm here. And he was like, no, I don't have any questions. I don't want to know what's happening. I want to be in the mystery of it. And that was such a rare thing in our world. I think, as you were saying, we don't have the time for depth anymore. We have like every 2 seconds we're seeing something. And I think we miss out on a lot because we don't have that depth anymore. We don't stop and just wonder.
You have raised this topic. So I would like to know your thoughts on the social media and the smartphones. Like we are the social media, if I say the internet has been so accessible to us, and even the children from the age group of 3 to 6 or 7, they are just on the internet every time watching something on YouTube or just playing games on the smartphones. So what do you think? And these last 2 years have been in the lockdown, so they can't just go out and just play. So what do you think? Well, how it's going to affect, and it is affecting the generation that we are going to observe in coming years? Like what could be like the curiosity part which we used to have, like I'm just saying that we used to have, but you are too much more experienced than me, and there is a lot of things that you have experienced at your time, like that you can say proudly that, hey, you just shut up and just listen to me. We had that thing. So apart from that, let's just ask this question, that smartphones and the internet, that is a integrated part of this generation. So how it is affecting like the generation, like how it is affecting the curiosity of the generation. Like I have seen the children that they don't ask that questions which which we have listened to a lot of kids. Like you might have listened to listen many kids have asked you the questions, like your niece and nephews might have answered you, or maybe your children, your own children. So they might have asked you that, like, dad, I want to know about like waves, like how waves are coming, and what are those things shining in the sky at night. So how do you think this curiosity have changed in past years, and
Yeah.
including the lockdown part, which made internet more accessible?
Yeah, and I would say it made it had whatever accessibility it had, but it made people need it more. People have more of a dependence on it now, and I think that's the general feeling I have with all these technological advances. Is it always feels like a double-edged sword. It provides so much that's new, and does it make us actually happier? That's a big question to me, because when you look at all the statistics, it's not making us happier. People are getting more anxiety, more depression, more attention deficit disorders. And that seems pretty obvious to me. When I have something that's like poking my attention every 15 seconds, and that's what I get used to, then how am I going to be sitting for 4 hours thinking about one thing? My mind is used to doing this, right? And we just train ourselves, and the technology trains us to do that faster and faster. And it's serving its own purposes. This thing is serving its own purposes. It's trying to get the person to use it. I don't think very differently about this than any other kind of addictive thing, whether it's a chemical, like a drug that someone's addicted to, whether it's the phone and the internet, whether it's work. People can get addicted to anything. It's just, when is there a need to go to something to feel okay? And that's becoming, in my mind, that's becoming more widespread as technology evolves. And so, there's a statistic I saw, I don't know how it is worldwide, but in the US, about a year ago, in the first parts of the lockdown, when people were really like, it was just hitting everyone out of nowhere, there was like something like 20% of people like 18 to 23 years old in the United States had thought about suicide just in that month. Just in that month, 25% of people. That's incredible. That's so much suffering, right? And so we are, I think one of the things that pulls me back to all the interest in spirituality is like, well, what are the actual things that make us feel well and connected? And we're social mammals. We really need other mammals. We are just directly from the chimpanzees, right? And we see how much they're intertwined in the social fabric. And so when something like coronavirus comes around and people have to separate from each other, that really hits at a really low level circuit in the body that says, this is not how I want to be living. I want to be connected. And so it's very natural. I have pictures of all my friends on here. It makes me feel connected, right? So in the kind of sense that a drug can make me feel at ease, it makes me think I'm connected, but it actually doesn't necessarily foster the same kind of connection as if you were over at my house and we were interacting and sharing the room together. And so I think it creates this thing where the mind keeps thinking it's going to be satisfied with connection through the device, but actually our bodies aren't getting satisfied. And so we're feeling this like seasickness almost. Why am I not connected? I'm talking to people all day. I'm connected, just more people than I've ever been connected to. So why do I feel disconnected? It's a really amazing paradox. And technology seems to always be trying to help that kind of thing, but not actually getting to the roots of the problem. I think a lot about, like, if you look at like what the founders of these huge companies were like, I think it gives you insight into things, right? Mark Zuckerberg made Facebook originally to try to get into a popular group at school, right? To try to get into some of these clubs, right? So what does Facebook manifest for billions of people? Comparisons, trying to be like in, popular kind of social scripting, all that stuff. So that to me is really automatic when you think about what his state of mind was when he made Facebook. So where are the technologies that are coming from people that are trying to get directly more connected to their hearts, to each other, to their community, to their natural intelligence. This is the kind of thing that I'm hoping we see more of a wave of in the next couple of years, but it's just starting as far as I can tell.
So here I would like to like ask you about your new project, which is Sleep Awake Camp. So you are doing this camp for like the students of high school and inter school. So what is this camp? And I am a bit I've going through about the video and the stuff that you have on your website. So it says that it is about like making aware them about the real life, the real truth that they are lacking in like in the schools, and that I will also be agree that we are not teaching the real life in the schools. We are just making our students, making ourselves to just think about that we have to prepare for something big, prepare for something that, and not just living the life. And this actually happens in India a lot, because I don't know about the US, but in India, schools is in we have 12 years of studies, like 12, 13 years. Like we have nursery and then KG, and from first to 12th we have like where we study kind of thing. So in class 10th, in grade 10th, we just separate from our streams. So we have separate streams like science, humanities, and commerce. So from there, many students get into the coaching centers, get into there, and just going through just solving the problems, solving the objective problems, and all, and they just misses out the concept of science, like what actually science is doing. So just kindly tell us about the Sleep Awake, what that camp is, and how are you helping the students to get over this, like the burden that they have on their shoulder and their head, so how they can get through that.
Yeah. So first I'd say I haven't run this camp yet. It's coming this next summer in like
Yes.
a month. So
Yes.
it's preliminary. It's not public, and I just am starting to work on it right now. But the idea of it is just like you said, it's very easy to graduate high school, go right before to college and actually have learned nothing about being a human being, which is amazing, right? You can learn, the way I tell people is like, I learned about quantum mechanics before I learned anything about my emotions. And that's amazing to me, right? It's amazing that I can like go through 12 years of school and not actually learn the things that are going to be important on a day-by-day basis. I learn all these facts that I'm probably never going to use. And I learned very little about my emotional well-being. And that was really, for me, that was really hard. As I said, being depressed in high school, it was just very hard. And no one in the community seemed to understand what was going wrong. You could talk to normal psychotherapists and stuff, but it never seemed to get to the core. And over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of work in personal development and worked with groups on, working through traumas, working through conflicts in groups, all these very human things. And I use that word trauma in a really general sense. I think everyone that grows up has traumas. That it's not like, there's specific capital T traumas, but everyone has gone through tough times and difficult experiences. And those experiences have shaped the whole way that you look at reality, So the classic thing is if someone's been like mugged, on the street, the next day they walk on the street, they're much more afraid and tentative, and it's in their body. But that's like a microcosm of something that happens to everyone every day, depending on how your family thought they should raise their kid and how strict to be and how your culture acts, and all this kind of stuff is having a huge effect on people's lives. And they've done a ton of studies that show that those initial experiences really deeply determine your well-being through your life. So I felt like there's this one time in your life when you're leaving high school and you're about to go to college, that age where you're 18 years old, and it's the first time you're really going to be like leaving home and like on your own. And that felt like the most like powerful time to have an intervention with someone. If you were ever going to interact with someone and just like one time in their life and try to see what you could do, that moment to me is the most powerful, because you're old enough where you're able to handle learning all this stuff, like learning about difficult emotions and like really being with anger and fear and grief and all these things that are part of everyone's life, but no one talks about, right? It's like everyone kind of wants to look happier than the other people, and so holds that stuff in, at least in the US culture. And so you don't get these things processed. There's a lot of repression. So I felt like, I have more different reasonings for this, but in general, there's this one window you have that's like the summer between high school and college, where you can do an intervention with someone and really teach them all these aspects of physical well-being that they might not have focused on. Exercising regularly, eating well. Like, what does it actually feel like to do that for 2 months? Emotional well-being. Like, what are these emotions? What do they mean? How are they intelligent? What does it mean to have like really clear no's for people and be able to tell people no? Those things are very rare. A lot of the time people repress these things. So, all the elements around emotional intelligence and what it is to feel your emotions and to what it is to be a human being in all these dimensions. Being creative, letting your full creativity out and not worrying about what people think about it. There's some practical skills, things like finances. Almost no one I've known ever in high school got the basics on like having a budget and taking care of their own finances. You just kind of have to roll into that and fumble around and figure it out. So I compiled a list of all the things that I wish that I had when I was 18 that I learned over the last 25 years since then. I'm 43 now, so it's been 25 years. Like, I made a long list of that stuff and then designed a camp that would just teach everyone all those things. So there's physical health, emotional health, creative expression, sexuality, which is such a taboo thing in our culture. Like, what would it be like to actually get a chance to understand the nature of being a sexual human being? So these are the things that fascinated me.
When you are talking about sex and something related to sex, anything about that, you're not a good person. Like that taboo we have. I don't know if that happens in America or not, but in India, you can't talk about sex. Like people will see you as like you're a molester or something. So if you talk about sex, but that is an important thing which we are missing out. Like, we should talk about those things, and we should talk about the science behind that thing. Why sex is important, and why that thing is like connected to all of us, and why it is like affecting all of us, and what is the importance. And there are a lot of things that affects us, but we don't talk about it, like anxiety and all these things, like which our parents thinks that, there's nothing to worry about it. Just have a glass of milk or something. You will be fine.
Totally. And there's something powerful. I've been in groups before where you have 50 people in the group.
Sorry.
And it's all good. When you have a big group of people and someone gets in the middle of the group and they start to share how much anxiety they've been having about something, all of a sudden everyone is like, oh, thank God someone's sharing this. Like, I have it too. Now we can all talk about this. And so there's something really special. The word I always use is permission. There's something really special about having a group environment where you have full permission to feel anything that is coming up and to share it. And it's
you have a common ground. Then you have a common ground to talk about.
Yeah. And if you share something that felt really difficult, but then you find out that everyone else in the circle has felt the same thing, all of a sudden it feels totally different. You don't hold it to yourself. It's just like, oh, wow, this is just part of the human experience. And in my experience, being in groups where you see that permission happen. You have a couple brave people that come up and they share really difficult things. And then all of a sudden, everyone feels like it's okay to share those things. And they all relieve that burden. So that's really what I'm hoping to create. And we're just going to run a small experiment next year, probably like 16 campers, really small, just to test, because this is a pretty intensive program. It's almost like military training, but for yourself instead of for an army, to really like learn about what this is made of. It's not easy to do that all the time.
Do you know one thing? I don't know about the US Army, but in Indian Army, there are camps for like teaching the faiths and the spirituality to the army people. So
Wow.
there is something like that. I have that day I was interviewing someone from the he was a teacher in army, so he used to teach army peoples the mathematics and all, because that's also important. So he told me like they have yoga classes and spirituality classes and all these things. They are getting to know about all these things. So that's how a soldier is made. So that was a very fascinating thing.
Yeah, that's cool. There's definitely not anything like that in the US Army, as far as I know.
I think Bear Grylls have also gone through a therapy of spirituality. Do you know Bear Grylls?
I don't know what that word is.
You don't know Bear Grylls? Okay. On the Discovery Channel, there was also another show.
I do. I know who you're talking
Man versus Wild, and that person who can go anywhere and can eat anything, and probably someday I will be interviewing him also. Because you have given me the confidence that I can interview the people from the Discovery Channel also. So that's
just the meetings.
That's just I do you know I'm still figuring out that I'm doing this interview. I am in the interview. So and I'm talking to you and I'm listening to your like thoughts and all. So that's I'm just figuring it out, right? And like throughout the day I was like preparing for this thing, and I was just typing the questions. Okay, so these are the questions, and now I'm just thinking about why I just put I just typed the questions, because I haven't asked any of the questions that are typed here in front of me. All I have asked is.
It's a good sign, though. It means you've been listening and responding to the moment instead of thinking you had to know the whole plan.
So just for wrapping up, because you have given me 60 minutes, but I have taken a lot from there, even a lot from like some extra time I have taken from it. I have stolen some extra time. So just to wrap up, last two questions I would like to ask. In the previous podcast, which I was listening to you, you have like said that you would like to meet two persons. One is Buddha and another one is Einstein. So I would like to know what were the questions that you would like to ask to Albert Einstein on the dinner. Except one thing that I would like to ask him, that how to hit on a girl. Like he's best at that thing. Okay,
that would be your first question for Einstein. I've never heard something like that before. I think I would ask him, if you look at his work, he talks a lot about consciousness, but it's never in his science formulas. E equals mc squared, gravitation, that sort of thing. It's not, consciousness isn't there, but he talks about consciousness a lot. And there's one thing that he says in one quote, I'm going to misquote it, but he says, space and time are not conditions in which we live. They are methods by which we think. Right? That's a really deep idea, that space and time is not some fundamental place where you are in three-dimensional space. No, it's the way that you think about life that is three-dimensional. That's fascinating.
That's something that we that is what it is, because we are thinking, right? Like there is no graph, three-dimensional graph in between, but we have made like that's just our understand for our understanding.
Yeah. And
And
so,
one more thing to clarify, I won't Einstein that question. That was just for fun, but I would just mug up. I would just get the fumbles if that personality came in front of me, or maybe I just go on asking my questions about like what was his experience with that and this, and like reading his the way he got the Nobel Prize, and the theory of relativity wasn't there in his mentioned in his Nobel Prize, but it was photoelectric effect and all the things that the revolution that was going on in 90s, sorry, 1900s. So in that century, when the century was started, so how these things happen to him. So I would like to ask all these things, and you would like to ask questions to Buddha also. So one question for him also. Like I would like to have one question.
yeah, I would love to know, if I was talking to him and it was right now, it was 2021, I would ask him like how his teachings would be updated for the way culture is right now. Because what it seems like, his teachings seem to me the most profound, direct of any of the kind of standard religions, but it's still not like spreading. It's not like, I would say a lot of people might be Buddhists, but they might not still be having the direct experience that he's talking about enlightenment, right? They might be suffering plenty and just have a certain set of beliefs. And so I have a curiosity about like, how he would go about it with people in the consciousness they're in today.
So Jeff, just I would like to have one advice that you would like to give to any undergraduate or any child that is there, who want to pursue science in his later life, and what would the advice that you would like to give him? And then as the thing is there, so I would request you to just request the people to subscribe to my channel, and then we can sign off. That's mandatory.
Yeah, so first, let's do the advice first.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say two things. One of them is whatever advice I would give anyone, they should trust themselves over me. They should trust their own experience over anyone else's experience, and entertain other people's advice, but always look to see, does this actually make sense for me? Do I want this advice? That's like a huge thing in my life. Like everyone is the final authority on their own life, and they shouldn't give that away to anybody. That said, I would really, in terms of the stuff we were talking about camp, I would say like there's a lot of questions people have about their existence, and they put them away because they don't think it's like worth exploring, or because there's fear there. And I would say it's been a really beautiful thing to start to ask those questions that I was scared to find out the answers to. And so in trusting your own authority, like look for the things that you're avoiding, especially like what is it that you wake up every day and you don't even notice that you avoid, and then go explore that and see where that takes your life. Because the stuff I'm doing in my life right now, there was no way to predict it. It was always just from following these random signals that were coming up. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, now I don't want to do that, looking around. So I would really say to trust that compass that's inside, that just is like pulled magnetically to different things. And then I would say, most importantly, subscribe to Rozender's science channel so that you can get more great content like this.
Like I can get Jeff again on my show, like talking about his camp, how his camp went through, and how the first session of his camp was like, and we will be discussing about the experiences we have on the camp. So thank you very much, Jeff, for joining. And I waited for long, and I had zero expectation that this will ever happen, and I just went like, I don't know. Maybe at some day in some other podcast, I will be talking about this podcast, and maybe I'll be just, and I am just thankful to you to join and just trusting me that this will go something, that this will worth something. So let's just take a screenshot and then we can sign off.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Shiva. It's good to talk with you.